Every ship in the world is stuck except one kind. Chinese tankers are moving freely through the Strait of Hormuz right now, while vessels from Japan, South Korea, Europe, and America sit anchored outside burning fuel, watching oil prices climb $40 a barrel in 3 weeks. And the reason they're moving freely isn't military strength. It isn't a back-channel deal. Iran put the condition on record publicly to CNN. You want through, pay in Chinese yuan. That's it. That's the whole offer. And the fact that you probably heard more about Trump's Truth Social ultimatum than that single sentence tells you everything about how badly this story is being covered. If this kind of analysis, the financial war underneath the shooting war, is what you're looking for, hit subscribe. This is what we do here. Let's establish what's actually happening on the water first, because the numbers are more shocking than any headline. Before February 28, 2026, roughly 20 million barrels of oil passed through the Strait of Hormuz every single day. That's 20% of everything the world burns moving through a channel 33 kilometers wide, where Iran controls the entire northern coastline. When the U.S. and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury that day, killing the supreme leader, hitting IRGC command, striking across 26 of Iran's 31 provinces, Iran answered within 72 hours. Not with a missile barrage aimed at American ships, with a closure. Tanker traffic collapsed. War risk insurance through the corridor became effectively unaffordable. Brent crude went from $73 a barrel to over $114. Goldman Sachs said the elevated prices could last through 2027. But here's what Washington didn't plan for. Iran didn't close the strait equally. Iranian flagships kept moving. Chinese-owned tankers kept moving. Pakistan, Turkey, and India, after direct government-to-government talks with Tehran, negotiated their own terms. This was not a blockade. A blockade stops everyone. This was a permission system. And between February 28th and mid-March, between 11.7 and 16.5 million barrels of Iranian crude moved to China through the Shadow Fleet under IRGC escort, while every Western vessel sat locked outside. The condition for passage was already visible in the tanker data before Iran said a word publicly. Pay in yuan, move freely. Stay in dollars, stay anchored. Now, to understand why that offer is more dangerous to Washington than the missiles, you need to understand what the petrodollar actually is, because this is the system Iran is targeting, not with weapons, with a currency. August 1971, Nixon ends the dollar's convertibility to gold. The Bretton Woods system, the financial order that governed the post-World War II world, is gone overnight. The dollar is now a fiat currency, nothing backing it. Washington needs a reason for the world to keep wanting dollars, or the whole thing collapses. The answer came from a crisis. The 1973 Yom Kippur War triggered an Arab oil embargo. Prices went from $3 a barrel to nearly $12. In July 1974, Treasury Secretary William Simon flew to Riyadh. The deal was clean and world-changing. Saudi Arabia would price its oil exclusively in U.S. dollars. Surplus revenues would be recycled into American Treasury bonds. In return, Washington provided military protection and arms. OPEC followed Riyadh's lead. From that moment forward, every country on earth that needed oil, Japan, Germany, India, Brazil, every one of them, first had to get dollars. Oil ran the world. Oil was priced in dollars, so the world ran on dollars. That gave Washington something no other country in history had ever held: permanent structural global demand for its currency, the ability to run trade deficits without a currency collapse, lower interest rates because foreign governments had to park their dollar surpluses in U.S. Treasury bonds, and the ability to cut any country off from the entire global economy just by locking them out of the dollar system. That is what Iran is attacking, not a military target, a financial mechanism, and the weapon it's using has no return address. China saw this coming long before February 2026, and it built the infrastructure to handle it. Start with the numbers that explain why China cares more about the Strait of Hormuz than America does. In 2025, China imported a record 11.55 million barrels of oil per day. More than 55% came from the Middle East. Roughly 45 to 50% of all Chinese crude imports pass through Hormuz. China receives 37.7% of all oil flowing through that strait, the single largest share of any country on Earth. The United States receives 2.5%. For decades, that dependency was China's biggest strategic vulnerability. To keep its factories running, its cities lit, its military fueled, China had to first acquire dollars from a country that had shown repeatedly it was willing to use the financial system as a weapon. After Russia was cut off from SWIFT in 2022, Beijing stopped treating this as a theoretical risk, so China built a parallel system quietly, without announcements. In 2015, the People's Bank of China launched CIPS, the Cross-Border Interbank Payment System, a settlement network for yuan-denominated transactions that routes payments between banks without touching American correspondent banks, without using SWIFT, and without exposure to U.S. financial jurisdiction. In 2018, China launched the Shanghai International Energy Exchange. Oil futures contracts tradable in yuan for the first time. Western analysts called them symbolic. In 2024, CIPS processed 8.2 million transactions worth roughly 24.5 trillion, a 42.6% increase from the year before. By early 2026, CIPS had expanded to cover more than 4,900 banking institutions across 189 countries. This is the infrastructure Iran activated when it named its condition. A payment routed through CIPS in yuan does not pass through American banks. It does not touch SWIFT. It does not appear inside the sanctions architecture Washington spent 50 years building. For the purposes of that transaction, it is invisible to the United States. China did not build this to destroy the petrodollar in one move. The yuan is still only about 2% of global foreign exchange reserves. The dollar sits at 57%. SWIFT data shows the dollar handling roughly 48% of global payments versus the yuan's 3%. China understood it didn't need to replace the dollar everywhere. It needed one functioning alternative corridor, credible, operational, ready for the right crisis. The Strait of Hormuz, effectively closed to Western shipping and quietly open to yuan-denominated trade, is that crisis. The countries feeling this most are not in the West, they're in Asia. Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and India together receive around 38% of all Hormuz oil flows. In 2025, roughly 78% of Middle Eastern crude bound for those four economies moved through the Strait. Japan has about 150 days of onshore reserves. South Korea and Taiwan hold less. These countries are not facing an abstract geopolitical shift, they're facing a clock. India's response is the one that should be alarming Washington most. New Delhi needed gas tankers through the Strait. It did not call the State Department. It did not wait for American diplomacy to work. It called Tehran directly, government to government, and negotiated its own passage terms. Read that slowly. The world's fifth largest economy, a country the United States has spent years cultivating as a counterweight to China and Asia, bypassed Washington entirely and cut its own deal with Iran. That is not a footnote. That is the geopolitical order reorganizing itself in real time. What does Washington do about this? On March 22nd, Trump issued a 48-hour ultimatum on Truth Social. Open the Strait fully, or Iran's power plants get hit, starting with the biggest one first. Iran responded that any strike on its energy infrastructure meant retaliatory hits on all U.S. and Israeli energy facilities across the region, and the Strait would stay closed by March 23rd. Trump had extended the deadline 5 days, citing what he called productive talks. The Strait remained closed to Western commercial shipping. Here is the problem with the ultimatum strategy, stated as simply as possible. Trump's 48-hour deadline addresses a military problem. The yuan condition is not a military problem. You cannot bomb ships. You cannot sink a ship for paying in the wrong currency. You cannot threaten your way out of a settlement currency offer. The only real answer to Iran's financial move is to make the dollar system more attractive, less coercive, more predictable, more trusted for the countries being asked to choose between them. That is not a 48-hour fix. That is not a 5-day fix. That is a decade-long project, and the erosion was already underway before a single strike landed in Iran. The dollar's share of global foreign exchange reserves dropped from 72% in 2001 to 57% by early 2025. China cut its U.S. Treasury holdings by more than 45% from their peak. The world's central banks added more than 1,000 tons of gold to their reserves in 2024 alone. The trend was slow enough that Washington could call it manageable. Iran just made it urgent. Here is the final thing to sit with. Every other Iranian military action in this war costs something. Missiles cost money. Drones get shot down. Ballistic strikes invite American countermeasures. Every weapon and fires gives the U.S. military something to target, something to track, something to destroy. The UN payment condition costs Iran nothing. No missiles, no fuel, no targeting coordinates for American surveillance drones. It just redirects which currency's clearing system handles the next oil payment, and in doing that, it potentially rewrites a piece of the financial architecture that Henry Kissinger flew to Saudi Arabia to build in 1974. Whether this reshapes global oil pricing permanently depends on things neither side controls right now. Whether Gulf producers follow Iran's lead, whether Asian buyers lock in Yuan settlement beyond this crisis, whether the Yuan can build the institutional trust a reserve currency requires over decades. These are real questions without clear answers. What is clear is this: the offer is on the table. The payment corridor is running. Countries from India to Turkey to France and Italy are negotiating passage directly with Tehran. The permission strait is open. The dollar condition has not been restored. A war launched to demonstrate American power may be doing more to accelerate the end of American financial dominance than anything China could have planned or paid for. That is not the secondary story of this conflict. That is the only story that matters in 20 years. If that gave you something the mainstream coverage didn't, share this with one person who needs to understand what's actually happening. Subscribe if you want the financial war covered the same way we cover the shooting war, and drop your prediction in the comments. Does the Yuan corridor survive after this war ends? I want to know what you think. I'll see you in the next one.